Hi, this is Lizzie Hampton, and for my Global Justice vlog, I will be applying the concepts learned from our Humanitarian Intervention Unit onto a current event, the withdrawal of American troops from Afghanistan. For my blog, I selected an article from the international grassroots digital publication Toward Freedom, titled Afghan Women's Frontline Resistance Against 20 Years of Humanitarian Intervention. This article, written by Alessandra Bajek on October 1st, 2021, examines the role of Afghan women in their active resistance to fundamentalism, warlordism, and imperialism in the decades before, during, and now after American military intervention in Afghanistan. Specifically, this article discusses the role of RAWA, an indigenous women's movement in Afghanistan, and how women will continue to actively resist oppression in Afghanistan post-American intervention. In this slide, I will provide a brief background on the American War on Terror. The War on Terror and the 20-year American military intervention in Afghanistan formally concluded on August 30th, 2021, following the chaotic and swift withdrawal of all American troops from the country. Since then, many conversations around the status of women in Afghanistan have been prompted, oftentimes portraying Afghan women as helpless and without agency. This rhetoric is a result of the American military justifying their protracted occupation by framing the intervention under the pretext of saving Afghan women. This use of colonial Orientalist rhetoric reflects Angie's dynamic of difference through the contrast of the oppressed non-Western woman, Afghan woman, in need of liberation from the Western savior, the American military. The American quest to liberate Afghan women also never asked or factored in what liberation and equality meant to Afghan women, and instead imposed Western imperialistic ideals of gender equality in urban centers while ignoring the insecurities of rural women. This article also emphasizes the repeated pattern of American military interventions in the Middle East under the facade of humanitarian interventions, such as in Iraq, Libya, and Syria, which has resulted in about 38 million people being displaced. In particular, the article highlights the work of the Revolutionary Association of the Women in Afghanistan, RAWA, a pro-democracy, pro-secularist, and anti-fundamentalist indigenous women's movement established in 1977 following the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Today, the movement strives to be a voice for Afghan women by Afghan women and seeks to expose the violence and injustice endured at the hands of Western intervention, the Taliban, and warlordism. Since the beginning, RAWA members have been against American intervention in the country for several reasons. First, Afghan women have, historically, disproportionately bared the costs of conflict and therefore would experience greater instability and violence as a result of American intervention. In other words, they knew that another war was not going to bring peace to the country, but further fracture it. Second, Western actors, such as the American military, do not understand the varied and complex political and social context within which Afghan women live, and therefore they cannot liberate Afghan women. The only people that can do this are Afghan women, as they are the only ones to understand the dangers and oppression that they face. This reflects Walzer's argument that foreigners who ultimately do make the decision to intervene are truly not equipped with adequate, proper information to pass information on the internal affairs of another state or to presume illegitimacy. Drawing from the work of Charlesworth, we can understand that the framing of the war on terror and humanitarian intervention in Afghanistan through gendered and racialized terms results in the othering of Afghan women and serves to further the white savior complex in the intervention. It can also be argued that this understanding is a result of the exclusion of women and non-Western actors in the development of the right to protect norm. Drawing from Angie's analysis of the War on Terror from a colonial lens, we can understand that the War on Terror has created a paradox. While seeking to liberate women, the U.S. military has actively violated the rights of women, worsened the conditions in which they live, and furthered the violence against them. Additionally, this paradox can be seen in the exclusion of women from conversations concerning women's rights in Afghanistan during American intervention and the withdrawal process. Furthermore, as mentioned earlier, the dynamic of difference can be seen in the War on Terror through the dichotomy of the oppressed Afghan woman in contrast to the liberatory Western actor who will help to civilize them and bring them to democracy. To conclude, it must be emphasized that the War on Terror was never about saving women, but part of a broader modern imperialistic project to transform the uncivilized, oppressive Middle East into peace-loving democracies, as stated by Angie. We know that the War on Terror was never about saving women, as the opinions of Indigenous Afghan women have been continuously ignored and overlooked throughout the Reconstruction process. For instance, we know that the women of RAWA repeatedly warned the Americans not to work with the Taliban, just for the United States to revive the terrorist group that they had been fighting in the name of Afghan women's rights for 20 years and then leave. It is the common consensus of Afghan women that the American intervention in the country did not liberate them, but served to worsen the conditions in which they live, and that the only way for Afghan women to be liberated is for Afghan women to have the power and agency to do it themselves.